I'm struggling. I'm struggling to obtain happiness, and I'm struggling to be happy. And, it's the first words of the DP, and I think there's always something special about the first words and the last words, right? In the Bible, when God's trying to describe himself in a way that people can understand, he says, I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, right? So I try to pay very special attention to kind of the first and the last words. So at this time, it was kind of the first time I was reading the Chunsangyal and kind of going through it. And the first pages are really about God and God's existence and why we should believe in God and why God has an impact on our lives. And one of the lines there was, God should be more real to us than pain, right? That's how real God should be. And on page 1, it states, when we know that God truly exists, all problems will be solved, right? And on page 2, Father says, it is an account, he's claiming it's an account from my own experiences, that the description that Father is giving of God is his personal understanding, experience of God. And it reminds me, I believe it's a line in the principle, but there's a line that always impacted me about people continue to commit sins because their understanding of God is still conceptual, right? So if we think of Father claiming he knows God, it's his own experience, then that's what it really means to be in this idea of direct dominion of God, right? This idea that we call, we say, completion, perfection. So another quote that Father said that kind of really encompasses this heart is that he says, I am the happiest person in the world because I can digest any problem with love, right? And that quote really impacted me because I think I was so happy to hear that Father is happy, right? Because I think, and maybe this is a difference in the generations, but I grew up with this kind of message that we have to suffer, right? I think it was a very common theme among the first generation that we have to suffer to do God's will, right? It's a suffering course, it's a course of indemnity, right? That we sacrifice, but it's worth it, and we sacrifice. And, Father was always running around and not sleeping enough, and, his history is one of real suffering. So for Father to claim then that he's the happiest person in the world was very liberating for me to read. And it was also very kind of affirming of my belief about we should be happy, right? We shouldn't be suffering. Yeah. We should be happy. And so it asked me the question then, why are they still suffering, right? Father claims that he can digest any problem with love, then why is God suffering? Because he's a being of love. And it gets back to my point, when we read those first lines of the principle, we think, yeah, I'm suffering, right? But why is God suffering? Well, God's not suffering because on behalf of himself, he's suffering on behalf of our suffering, right? It's not God's suffering that hurts him. It's not your parents suffering. Their hearts are clear, right? They're full of love. They're connected with God. It's our suffering that they're trying to solve, that they're trying to fix, right? So, again, this idea of suffering and sacrifice, I've always felt, well, who wants that? Why would anyone want to purposely suffer, right? It's like contradictory. And so the question I often ask is, and I think it's important to reflect on, is if we weren't in the movement, if we didn't join the church, would we have suffered less? And again, I don't think that's a question anyone can answer. It's just kind of a hypothetical, something to think about. It's why you can't really compare, because you can never know, right? But I often wonder, what would parallel universe Young Yale's life have been like, right? And I often use that as kind of like a thumb. And in my case, I don't feel like suffering, and I know I've led a kind of sheltered life, and happy childhood, no serious trauma, and even since giving this sermon, I've lost both my parents. There was a tragedy in the family, but even then I feel, well, because of the principle, because of the context of our faith and the context of spirit world, that they weren't complete tragedies. I was able to really digest them, and I also have, so my conclusion, asking this question is actually our lives are better because of the principle. Something I really believe, it's something that I believe very kind of is core to my faith, that following the principle makes your life happier, it makes your life better. And there's no way to prove it, but if we could see our parallels lives and our parallel selves, right, then we're living the happiest version of our lives because we follow the principle, because we're living a life closer to the source of happiness and the source of love. I think something that always bothered me as a kid was people saying life isn't fair, right? And even though I say it to my own kids, that's not fair, life's not fair, right? It's like a knee-jerk reaction. I don't actually believe that. I need to stop saying that. I believe life is fair, but we just don't know we can't see the accounting, right? I think the whole point of the principle is that life is fair. It's just we don't know how it's fair because we don't know all the factors, all the variables, all the things that factor in to life being fair, life being not, right? And in some ways, maybe that's easy for me to say because I haven't experienced real tragedy, real trauma. But I think that's the part of the principle when we're looking at, restoration and how we solve these problems. There is a path to solve all types of suffering and all injustices, right? And in that way, it's fair. It's not the end. It's not unsolved. There is a path of restoration. One of the other parts of the principle that really moves me is returning resurrection, right? And predestination. The idea that in the end, everything can be resolved. Everything can be healed, right? So, I think again, and I don't want to jump into my testimony of how I joined the church and committed to follow true parents, but one part of it was Father's life story and the story of home health, right? And the clinching part was the fact that even in literal hell, Father was a loving person. The Father was happy in himself, where he'd be like, he wasn't praying in desperation for God to save him. He was saying, don't worry about me, I'm all right? And I'm, maybe it'll be a little tough, but I'll give my extra food to my friends, and I'll make the prison guards happy with my work, and I'll be a model citizen in this hellhole, right? So again, because of the principle, because of that real understanding of God, Father can be happy in hell, right? Because it's not the circumstances of hell that makes people unhappy. It's our hearts. It's our struggles with ourselves and with the people around us. Now, again, I talk about happiness and joyfulness, but you can't be blind to the reality around us. There is trauma. There is genuine suffering. There are genuine problems that we have to address and find a path of restoration, a path of suffering. And when we go down that rabbit hole, it can become very heavy. But those problems have to be addressed. We can't ignore them. We can't be blind to the realities of the world. Right? In a way, the Russia-Ukrainian conflict brings it to our faces, and the media shows it. But if we're honest, we know that what's happening in Russia and Ukraine is always happening in some part of the world. Right? It's just not as visible. It's not in our faces. But the Chinese government is doing awful things to parts of its population. There are consistently tribal wars happening, right? So, but to solve those problems, I believe we need to follow the principle. And the more the principle is followed, the more that God is part of our solutions, then the less suffering there is, the more happiness there is. And there was a quote from my STF leader. Some of you may know him. We nicknamed him the Portuguese man of war. But Telmo, I always pronounce his last name wrong, but Silva? I always want to say saliva, but I feel like that's wrong. Huh?
Saliva?
Saliva, it is
No,
like
saliva.
Saliva.
With R.
saliva.
Yes.
Okay. So, anyway, he once said in giving his internal guidance, we have to be serious, yet joyful, right? And I feel like it's really been a good motto for me for looking at the world and trying to have a positive impact. Like, there are serious issues. We can't just be happy-dappy and always kind of ignorant of the world. But we can be joyful in the fact that we are solving these problems, that we're bringing more of the principle and more of God's heart to the world. So I think it's very important as a membership, as people, that we believe that we can be happy, and that we are happy, right? And I think that when I think about what is unique about the principle, I really believe, and a core part of my belief, is that we can be happy in every minute of every day. And that quote of Father is really something that has always stuck with me, that I am the happiest person in the world, right? And I don't think people would have thought that, looking at Father's life and, Father pushing everyone to work harder. But I think Father is always serious and joyful. There's an element of every time he's doing something, it really makes him happy because it's making God happy, right? And so there's kind of two core things that I really believe on this point. And one is I believe the world is always getting better, right? And these are things that can't be measured. They really have to be something you believe in. But I do genuinely believe that the world, if you could kind of record the points, right? The invisible points of how good the world is, right? Or how much suffering there is in the world. I believe the suffering is going down, and the goodness and the happiness and the stability of the world is going up, right? Across the whole thing, right? I think a lot of that maybe is due to merits of the age. I believe a lot of it's due to the general kind of evolution of religion and society, but I genuinely believe that. Maybe there's days or weeks or even years where it kind of goes down a bit before it goes back up, but definitely a really kind of hopeful upward trend, right? Actually, I was having a discussion with someone about what would you do in a post-apocalyptic kind of scenario if things get really bad? I'm like, I don't believe things are ever going to be post-apocalyptic, right? I just can't believe that, right? It's just against my whole faith and everything. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but I just can't believe there'll be a nuclear war or a global famine or anything like that. I think we've gone past that age, right? The era after the coming of heaven, right? We passed the danger zone, right? And then the other thing I genuinely believe, and this is something that, I don't know when I really started believing this, but I've always felt this, and maybe it's not something I should ever say in an interfaith situation or when there's other, faiths around. But part of me hopes that they also believe that about their own faith. Is, again, I believe that our membership, if you could do the invisible accounting, if you could write the points of every single blessed family and every individual member's situation, I believe on the aggregate, on the scorecard, we're happier than everyone else, right? And I feel like I have to, because if that wasn't true, if the Mormons are happier than us, then I'm gonna go be a Mormon. That's just, but what's the point then? What's the point of the principle? What's the point of understanding God and following God if it doesn't bring with it the actual closeness and the reward of that closeness with God, And I hope the Mormons think the same way. But it's, because I don't want to be elitist. I don't want to be, disparaging about the faith. I feel like if you believe something, you have to believe that it's the best thing, right? Otherwise, why would you believe it? Why would you not then go to something better, right? So in conclusion, I like to kind of conclude with a couple points, but I think my real conclusion is that I really believe the principle makes people happier. The better we get at following the principle, the happier we will be, and the happier we will make other people. And that's a really deep-seated belief I have, and I hope that everyone has that to some extent, because we shouldn't be miserable, we shouldn't be unhappy. We don't need to be. Am I on time? No one's recording? Okay. Then I just kind of put 5 bullet points to be happy, so I'll conclude with that, and then I'll hand it off to my dear brother Peter. So I think one of the key elements to this happiness is having God's perspective, right? Really trying to step back and see, how is God seeing the world? How is God seeing this situation? How is God seeing this difficulty? How does it compare in terms of the bigger perspective? And that really helps me when there are difficult times. If I'm able to step back from it, I get a much stronger perspective and understanding. It really helps bring a lot of stability into the situation and how I react to the situation. I think we have to be careful not to compare, even though I just talked about comparing to everyone else. I think in the day-to-day, it's very dangerous to compare because there's too many things we don't know. There's too many hidden things, right? I think this is almost crucial when people first get matched and blessed and the relationships are started. And we all get blessed sometimes. I got blessed with 20 other people I knew really well, right? There's always that temptation to kind of compare to other couples where they're at. Very dangerous and very unhealthy. Because actually they're all trying to figure it out. They're all trying their best, but we don't know the factors behind, right? Then I think it's always important to be grateful, right? I think when we practice gratitude, I think there was a talk during our meetings about Mother talking about always wanting us to be more grateful every day. It really, again, helps us to be stable and have a perspective, and to avoid, getting too caught up in any individual difficult circumstance. And then I think it's the last two. I think it's very important to be unselfish, right? To look for how we serve others and take care of others. How we kind of spread this principle of happiness, right? And last, and again, I think this comes down to my optimistic nature, is I'm always very, very hopeful, right?
Yeah.
That, like I said, the world is getting better, that people are always looking for goodness and how to be better themselves. Everyone wants to be happy and everyone's trying their best to be happy. That gives me a lot of hope, and I'm always kind of optimistic overall, right?
Yeah.
In the overall perspective, I think everything works out eventually. Right? Takes a lot of work, but it's definitely hopeful. So thank you for listening to me today. That was what I wanted to share. So I hope everyone is happy today and can hold on to that as long as possible, and can give them strength in times of difficulty. So I'll conclude there. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.